Incumbent Congresswoman Nancy Mace snagged a coveted endorsement by former South Carolina Governor and UN Ambassador Nikki Haley earlier this year. Her recent agenda, though, covering some controversial issues like cannabis reform and animal welfare as we inch closer to the June 14th primary. We want to thank you so much for being here.
Not so controversial, quite frankly. And I work on a lot of different issues, from infrastructure to veterans, to the Oversight Committee. I just came back from the border of Ukraine, so I hope that we can focus on a number of issues.
Absolutely.
And I don't consider God's creatures controversial, nor cannabis, because cannabis reform is actually being led by Republicans here in the Low Country, across the state of South Carolina.
The animal welfare, though, because you focused a lot on
I focus on a lot of different issues.
And a lot of things. No, and I totally understand that, but there are a lot of people out there, some of your constituents, and just critics overall.
Most of my constituents love animals.
That is in an era when we have inflation and high gas prices and all of that. Wanting to know, in the next term, should you be reelected, is what is going to be the focus to improve that part of our lives here in the Low Country?
Well, I believe I can walk and chew gum at the same time, and so I focus on a number of different issues. I love all of God's creatures. I've grew up around animals. I hunt. I'm a hunter. I grew up hunting with my father. Conservation is a really big issue for people in the Low Country, and whether you're Republican or Democrat, you want to make sure that our animals are treated with kindness, that they're treated in a very good manner. As much as you want to say it's controversial, it's not, and it is important to the Low Country.
It's not me who's saying it's controversial.
Well, you just did earlier.
Other people who are saying that it's controversial.
You just did.
Well, yes, I'm reiterating and I'm reflecting what people
and I
have
serve
been
on 3 different committees. I'm on transportation, infrastructure. I'm on the Veterans Affairs Committee, and I'm on oversight. I've passed 15 bills out of committee. So when you file a bill, the next step, hopefully you get a committee hearing, and then when the bill comes out of committee, you get a vote on the floor of the House. And I've passed 4 bills so far in my first 15 months in office out of the floor of the House: civil rights, veterans affairs, scholarship funding for Gold Star families, cybersecurity, and animal rights. And then in addition, I've passed 11 more bills out of various committees that I sit on. So I can focus on a number of different issues, including inflation. I just passed a bill called the Penny Plan, or filed a bill called the Penny Plan 2 weeks ago, that for every future dollar the federal government spends, you would cut a penny. And there's enough waste, fraud, and abuse of the federal government to be able to do that, and thereby you would balance the budget in 5 to 7 years. You would then, after the budget is balanced, you would increase spending between 10 and 13% annually. When you're talking about inflation and other issues that are really important to Low Country residents, I've never voted to raise taxes. So when we're talking about supply chain issues and inflation, one of the issues that causes inflation to rise are taxes. It's also deficit spending. It's also the trillions of dollars that the Federal Reserve prints every single year under every administration, whether it's Republican or Democrat. So I believe in the work that I'm doing. I'm covering not only that, I've been to the border multiple times. Illegal immigration is supremely important, even though we don't sit on the southern border. Just last year, a member of the MS-13 gang was arrested in Beaufort County. And then the year before that, there was a bust in September of 2019 in my hometown of Goose Creek, a human trafficking bust. And so I have filed bills on a number of these different issues related to the border and illegal immigration.
You are very passionate about these subjects, which I think that's
it's important to be accurate about the work that I'm doing.
To have someone who is very passionate about those particular issues. But do you feel that this race is different from the one that you ran against Joe Cunningham a couple of years ago? Well,
this is a swing district, and so we need a Republican nominee who can raise the money to win. And we want someone who's a fiscal conservative, someone who will be an independent voice, as I promised to be on the campaign trail in 2020.
And do you feel that having Nikki Haley behind you is the arrow in your quiver that you need to win the race?
Oh, she's amazing, and she's wildly popular. She's a constituent. Not only is she a leader on the South Carolina stage, national stage, but also world stage, and I'm really honored to have her support.
When Donald Trump had endorsed Katie Arrington, you were outside of Trump Tower one day later later, posting a video about the support that you had for the then candidate, now former President Donald Trump. Why did you do that? Why did you feel that was necessary?
I was already there. I was there doing interviews about legislation. I tend to be a very substantive member of Congress, and was there in New York doing media interviews about legislation that I had been working on, and was about a block away when that endorsement happened. And I just wanted to remind people that I was an original supporter. I worked for him. I supported him in 2020, and I support his policies today.
Well, I want to talk to you about the Amazon endorsement that you received this year as well. So we're going to do that after the break. Don't go anywhere. We're back with incumbent Congresswoman Nancy Mace, representing South Carolina's 1st District, and certainly you're very passionate about a lot of the policies that you are behind. Also want to talk a bit about cannabis reform. So you did get an endorsement from Amazon of your state's Reform Act. So when I first mentioned to you that these are controversial issues, it's not because I'm defining them as controversial, it's because there has been talk and argument amongst constituents, amongst others, who are concerned about legalizing, for instance, marijuana in the state of South Carolina. So I wanted to talk a little bit more about what the ideas are behind your act and how you would convince voters as to why it would be a good idea.
Well, you just said moments ago it's controversial. It's not controversial. It's actually a very popular idea, even in bright red South Carolina, where medical cannabis, that reform is being led by Republicans right here in the Low Country, and medical cannabis is popular by 70% of the population in South Carolina. In fact, my state's Reform Act is supported by 2/3 of Republican primary voters. It is a Republican and conservative ideal, this idea of federalism and states' rights, giving states the rights to do what they want, when they want it, how they want it, or prohibit it for a number of different issues, including cannabis reform, which is what my bill does. And what's even better about the States Reform Act that I'm really proud of is that there are guardrails to incentivize states that have it legal to ensure that they don't sell and market and advertise to kids. There's a financial incentive where we can pull their infrastructure funding if they were to do that.
And moving on to Veterans Affairs. So Charleston, your district, and the surrounding areas are home to the largest veteran population in South Carolina, and you had just recently passed a bill on cybersecurity on behalf of veterans. What other bills and what other ideals are you hoping to pass perhaps in the next term that are of benefit to our veterans here?
Yeah, one of the 4 bills that I passed on the floor of the House initially in my first few months in office was a bill to provide scholarship funding for Gold Star families, for families that lost a loved one in their service to our country, protecting our freedom and our democracy here and around the world. That was the very first bill I ever passed not only out of committee, but out of the floor of the House, and that bill sits in the Senate now. It's one of 4 bills that I've passed fully out of the House and into the Senate. And then last week I passed 5 bills, 3 out of Oversight Committee, and 2 of those bills are out of the VA. One was dealing with military sexual trauma for veterans who are transitioning out and making sure they have the resources and the folks that are helping them have the right training and background to help those individuals. But also one protecting our veterans when they're online from phishing scams, from cybersecurity risks, et cetera.
And I wanted to ask you about transportation because our infrastructure is a bit of a mess here in South Carolina. We've had such a huge influx of people moving to the state because of many, many reasons. That's why I consider myself an expat as well, is because it just offers a lifestyle that you really can't find anywhere else. But with that, you pay a price. And we are seeing bridges that are falling apart. We're seeing roads that are inadequate. So what are we doing to better the lifestyle even more so for that influx?
Yeah, one of the reasons that I got on the Infrastructure Committee was to be a part of that process. Unfortunately, the Infrastructure Committee has been very partisan. When we did the infrastructure bill, I had $1.2 billion in that bill for the Low Country, and it was stripped out in the Senate. I mean, every Republican that had an amendment or had appropriations in that bill, all of that was taken out. It's really important that you have someone who represents you and knows, hey, where are those resources? How can we help state and local and municipal and county level government organizations get some of that funding and bring it back here to Low Country?
Right, well, we've got the June primary coming up on the 14th. So do you have any last words for your opponents, your fellow candidates?
I'm very excited about it. I just ask that people look at our voting records. I've never voted to raise a single tax on anyone in the Low Country, either as a state lawmaker or as a member of Congress. I'm very fiscally conservative. Every promise I made on the campaign trail, I have delivered on. I promised to be a conservative and reached across the aisle to deliver results, which I've done. We're everywhere. We work 7 days a week, and if anyone ever needs any assistance, don't hesitate to call.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Congressman.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time.
Yeah.
We're back after this.